Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to use the information that we already have on the store, namely the information about if the user is logged in or not, to implement a very common security UI mechanism here at the level of our user interface. Right now, if we reload our application, we are going to see that we already have access here to the courses page. Normally, we should be redirected to the login page, and only if we are logged in should we get access to the courses page. Otherwise, we should be systematically redirected to the login page so that we have to authenticate first. So let's go ahead and implement this functionality. We are going to be using a router guard. The guard is going to be applied here at the level of the courses module. We're going to add it here in the can activate property. So this guard is going to make sure that only authenticated users can access any of the pages of the courses module. We are going to implement our authentication guard here in the auth module. So let's go ahead and create here a new file. We are going to call it auth.guard.ts. This file is going to contain only one class, the authentication guard class. This class will be an Angular service, so we are going to annotate it here with the injectable decorator, and we are going to immediately plug it in here in the application module. So let's go ahead and here at the level of our providers, we are going to add here the authentication guard, but let's not add it here to this root module directly. Instead, we are going to go ahead and add this at the level of our authentication module. So here in our static for root method, we are going to go ahead and add here an extra service. We're going to add here the authentication guard service. Also, before going any further, let's go ahead and use the guard. We are going to go here to our router configuration and we are going to configure here our authentication guard in the array passed to the can activate property. So this is an array of guards. In this case, we only have one guard applied to the courses module pages, which is the authentication guard that we are about to implement now. So let's go ahead and implement this guard. We are going to do that by implementing the can activate interface that comes here from the Angular router package. Let's go ahead and implement here this can activate method. The first argument that we need to pass it is an activated route snapshot. Let's go ahead and import it. Second argument is the router state snapshot, and here we have the option of returning either a boolean synchronously or a promise of a boolean or an observable of boolean. So as usual, we are going to choose an observable based API and we are going to return here an observable of boolean. In order to implement this can activate method, we are going to have to know if the user is logged in or not. So in order to know that, we need the store where we have all the users' authentication state. So let's go ahead and inject here the store. As usual, the store is going to be declared as an observable of application state. So let's pass in here the app state parameter. And we are also going to inject here the router itself, because we are going to be needing it in order to redirect the user to the login page in case it's not authenticated. So let's go ahead and import the router too. Let's now go ahead and see how can we get this observable of boolean that is going to confirm if the user is logged in or not. We already have that information in the store. So the first thing that we need to do is to access the store. And as usual, we are going to be using a selector. So let's go ahead and apply here the select operator. We're going to pass the isLoggedIn selector. Let's also go ahead and import the select operator. Now here we are retrieving here a boolean that says if the user is logged in or not. This will give us an observable of boolean, so in principle we could already return this here and we would get here a boolean that is true if the user is logged in, so the root transition will be allowed and the root transition will eventually occur. So we could already return this. Now what happens if the user is not logged in yet? If it's not logged in, we would not like simply to block the transition without anything else. If the user is not logged in, we would like to redirect the user to the login page. So let's go ahead and implement that logic using the tap operator. We get here a value which is the Boolean flag saying if the user is logged in or not. And what we want to do here is to implement the following logic. If the user is not yet logged in, only in that case we want to redirect the user to the login page. So let's go ahead and use, for example, navigate by URL, and we are going to navigate to the /login route, which is going to trigger the login page. We are now almost ready to try this out. Let's just do here one small improvement, which is whenever the user logs out from the application, here in the logout method of the application component, let's go ahead and also, in the same way that we are doing here in the authentication guard, let's go ahead and redirect the user to the login page. So we're going to go here to our application component. Let's inject the router in the constructor, and we are going to do the same thing that we are doing here. We are going to redirect the user to the login page. And with this in place, we are now ready to try out our authentication guard. Let's go ahead and reload our application, and notice that we are here accessing the courses URL. So if we now reload, we would expect to be redirected to the login page. And that is indeed the case, so our router guard is working as expected, and it's guarding the access to certain routes that require an authenticated user. Now if we log in the user to the application, we are going to see that we have been redirected like before to the courses route, but now the router guard allows us to go through with this router transition. So we can see this page as expected. If we head over here to the side menu and we now log out, we are going to be redirected to the login page. If we try to press here the courses menu, we are going to see that nothing happens. So the authentication guard is indeed blocking access to certain pages depending on the user authentication status as expected. Now, one important thing to bear in mind is that we should only apply this route to certain pages of the application. In the case of our application, we should specifically avoid applying the authentication guard to the login route itself. So if you notice, we are only applying the authentication guard to the courses module. But the login page, which is in the authentication module, is not being guarded by this guard. So that is why unauthenticated users can see the login page. This setup is important because if we accidentally apply the authentication guard also to the login page, then we are going to create an infinite loop. And that infinite loop scenario would go like this. We would have a user that is not logged in, get redirected to the login page, then on the login page the user is still not logged in, so it would be redirected to the login page again, etc., each time triggering the authentication guard. So let's keep this scenario of a possible infinite loop in mind whenever we are implementing something like an authentication guard. Now, another thing that is important to bear in mind is that this code could be easily bypassed by an attacker on the front end. So the real security, we always implement it in the back end. This is mostly for user experience purposes. If somebody sends us a link to a course to our user, we want to make sure that we give the user the best possible user experience. So if the user is not yet logged in, we are not going to show him a broken course page where he cannot see any data and only sees error messages. Instead, in order to improve the experience, we are going to redirect it to the login page. But keep in mind, the actual protection of the data is always at the backend. Okay, so now that we have implemented this, let's have a look at the state of our authentication solution. What we have here is a logged in user, but notice this, if we now hit here the refresh button, we're going to see that the authentication state is lost. And this is normal because the state was kept in memory, we have reloaded the page, so that state was wiped. Let's see how can we use NgRx effects to complete our authentication experience and solve this problem. This is coming right up in the next lesson.